Welcome to Colonize the Ocean podcast, where we discuss oceanic colonization, exploration, and education with your hosts Adam Jewell and Brendon Traxler.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Colonize the Ocean, the podcast. My name is Adam Jewell. I am the social media manager for Atlantis Sea Colony and Colonize the Ocean. And with me is the founder of Atlantis Sea Colony and my co-host, Brendon Traxler. Brendon, how are you doing today, buddy?
I am doing well. Been fighting a little cold for the last week or two, so if I sound a little off, that could be why. But otherwise, I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, we mention in like every episode how we work remotely from each other. I'm in the north where it's like winter 9 months of the year. So I really don't feel bad that you have a cold because I feel like you're finally getting something that you deserved, if that makes sense.
Well, it was 74 here a couple days ago, so.
Yeah, well, it was 4 degrees here today. So anyways, today we have an awesome guest with us. His name is Joesph Bishop. He has a long list of accomplishments and expertise in different fields. And, you know, I'm going to let him introduce himself here in a second, but it's just awesome being able to have him with us because he's kind of been along the journey with us on the Atlantis Sea Colony, you know, the social media wise. He participates frequently and throws advice in and just adds good discussion. So Joesph, thank you for joining us on our podcast today.
Good evening. You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Tell me a little bit about your background and how you came to get into this field and just where you're at now.
Well, it's kind of it seems strange given my original background. I grew up in a steel mill town called Weirton, West Virginia, which is not far from Pittsburgh. And my father was a steel worker in the mill, and most of my male relatives, that's where everybody worked. So I learned a bit, you know, over time, just being a kid there, you know, like how steel is made and, you know, heavy industry types things. But as a young person, especially when I learned how to read and started reading, I was just voracious. I read almost anything. If it had to do with any type of science or natural history, I went through everything that my elementary school library had. And then by the time I got to 6th grade, they used to do these old school type of evaluation tests, you know, where they gauge what where you're at, you know, your math skills, reading comprehension skills. And in the 6th grade, they rated my reading comprehension at collegiate level. So I was reading a lot. And
Wow.
as I got out into some of the classics, like Jules Verne was like opened up a whole new world, not just in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but space travel, going under the earth, powered flight, all kinds of things. And I also read Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island, that sort of thing, Joseph Conrad, 2 Years Before the Mast. And so I just and although I guess a lot about it doesn't, I never thought anything of it when I was 12 years old and people found that I had read and completely understood Moby Dick. People were looking at me like I was weird. But I just for some reason I was always drawn to ships and traveling the world that way by ship. And then of course you had in the 60s and 70s the TV specials made by Jacques Cousteau. I never missed one of those. I've seen every one he ever made. And that sort of thing just endlessly fascinated me.
Right.
And at the time, one of my cousins was married to a fellow who went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And he told me about what went on there, what he was learning there and what it was all for. And I just knew that was the place that I wanted to go, even more so than if I had never heard of Kingsport, I probably would have ended up joining the Navy. But the U.S. Merchant Marine is all of your commercial ships, freighters, tankers, ferries, barges, tugboats. That's all considered the Merchant Marine. And also being as my my great childhood hero from the entertainment world was Mr. Scott, and I wanted to be an engineer, and so that's what I ended up doing. And I actually got to meet Jim doing when he was doing a lecture tour. He actually came to the academy while I was there, and it was a real thrill. I'll tell you what.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
The main purpose of going to Kings Point was to immediately go to sea as a junior engineering officer on a commercial ship. Well, at that time there was an economic downturn, and jobs became really scarce really fast. So what I ended up doing in order to be employed, I became a radiological control engineer at the nuclear shipyard in Charleston, South Carolina. They were doing work on the older classes of nuclear submarines, and I was in the Office of Radiological Controls. We were like I guess you would consider it like a safety discipline to make sure that no contamination was being released, and that people were not being exposed to more than the government mandated limits as far as radiation, and those limits are vanishingly small. In fact, and the instrumentation that they use to check everybody on an annual basis is so sensitive that they know, and you could actually upset the readings by eating a banana.
Wow.
Because a banana contains a certain amount of potassium-40. They're that sensitive.
That's insane.
So anyhow, I learned a good deal about submarines, because I spent, of the 5 years I was at Charleston, half of it was in radiological controls, and then I moved over to the non-nuclear testing side of the house, because even though it's powered by a reactor, a submarine is still driven by a steam propulsion plant, and that's what I was trained on. So I knew how all that equipment worked, and so I went over to the testing office and for two and a half years, I wrote and assisted in the performance of testing for whenever a submarine is going through overhaul or repair. Anything that comes out has to be, like piping systems have to be hydrostatically tested to check for leaks, and that they can hold pressure at depth, and things like that. And then, there are operational tests also for the different systems. So other than the people who ride on them, I'm one of a handful of civilians that knows almost as much about how a Navy submarine works. But then I kind of got, I wouldn't call it bored, but I was looking for something different, a little bit more hands-on. And I had a brainstorm that, since I had engineering experience, a bachelor's degree, and a marine license, that commercial diving might be a good fit with those skills. So I went to the Divers Institute of Technology in Seattle, Washington. The program at the time was 6 months. I believe since then, because this was quite a while ago, this was 1988. Since then, they've expanded to where, with the additional skills that you are checked out in, it ends up being like 10 months, I think. But it goes through, you work with all kinds of different commercial gear, primarily surface supplied, but there's also different types of scuba that you work with also. I even got to check out in an old-fashioned Mark V deep sea diving suit. And I'll tell you, it looks intimidating, but once you get underwater, it's an absolute kick, because the whole rig, with the buoyancy of the suit, only adds about 5 pounds. So you almost feel bulletproof. It's like you watch an old John Wayne movie, that kind of thing. And from what I understand, the suit is still used. It's more than 100 years old now.
Wow.
And that technology is still in use in different parts of the world, because it's almost foolproof. You're very well, assuming that everybody is trained and all your equipment is kept in good order. The Mark V is a very, very solid system for making sure that you come back.
I think that's one of those things that you hear a lot of people talk about, like old machinery and just older equipment that, because I work in steel manufacturing myself, and like you kind of hear the stories about the older machines being able to work just as good, if not better, because they were built to last, whereas just about any product nowadays is just made to, get it out cheap and efficiently and quick.
Oh, absolutely. the original design mindset, prior to like 1965 or 70, anything built or designed in the times before that, the thought was that this thing was within certain limitations, as long as you didn't mistreat it, was supposed to last forever.
One thing we were talking about earlier that I wanted to circle back around to is you're talking about the Divers Institute of Technology. Interesting fact about that is when I graduated high school, I looked at going there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I put it out for all. Like I said, there's only 4 or 5 in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I put my feelers out for all of them, and that was, I think I narrowed it down to that one other one. But I wasn't a certified diver at the point in time, and the finances and stuff like that. It was just not a move at that point in time. Should I have done it in retrospect? I don't know, but it was very appealing back in '96 when I graduated high school.
Mm-hmm. Well, you didn't have to be certified even in scuba to go, because they would, part of the training was scuba.
Right.
And that was one of the sections where, because I was already scuba certified and had been for some time, I ended up getting, being one of the, I became I guess you would call it a teaching assistant in my class, because they were probably, I was, at the time I was 29, and I was pappy. Because everybody else was was fresh out of high school type guys.
Interesting.
And so those of us who were already scuba certified, we became teaching assistants, and it made the scuba section go by a lot more efficiently.
Sure. Because
the teacher could go through the lessons, and then we could kind of tutor anybody that was having troubles. My marine engineering background came into play even at the school, when we got to the sections on mixed gas diving and saturation. It does involve a certain amount of math,
mm-hmm.
and even a little bit of chemistry when you're talking about mixing gases. And it was really a help having that kind of educational background. There was another marine engineer, as a Cal Maritime grad, was in our class, and the two of us, we tutored a lot of the other guys in those sections, where and by the test scores, our class ended up being having one of the highest average scores that they'd ever seen. It was a good experience, and oddly enough, just like the situation when I got out of the Merchant Marine Academy, when I got my certificate from DIT, what I had planned for that was to get the certification and then turn around and apply to either Scripps Institute or Woods Hole to work with their research ships. And wouldn't you know it, at that exact time, both places disbanded their dedicated dive teams in favor of just contracting it out whenever they needed divers. So I did do for about 2 years. I worked for an inland waterways diving company down here in Florida, and so I picked up some very valuable experience doing that. And then I've had kind of a weird career from there. I jumped to working in a startup business that was at the time was building and doing sales, service, and repair on PCs. The old 386, 486
mm-hmm.
PCs. I got into it right at that point in time, technology wise, and so I did that for a while. And then I had first met Dennis Chamberlain when we were engineers together in RadCon at Charleston, and became fast friends very quickly. And he had moved from Charleston down to the Kennedy Space Center, and had taken up a position with the life sciences section, space life sciences, and he had come up with an idea for what he called a space analog, using the ocean as an analogous environment for space, because you can't exist under the water without technology, just like you couldn't exist in the vacuum of space without technology. And so he designed the Scott Carpenter Space Analog Station, which was essentially to use the ocean to demonstrate the challenges of living in a space capsule. And it was part of the NASA outreach program, which is where the funding came from. So we designed it around well, there were no podcasts in those days, but we were connecting by phone and through the very beginnings of the internet to school classrooms all over the Americas. And we made calls and taught lessons from underneath the water. And the kids really got into it. I mean, I like to hope that we inspired at least a few to pursue technology, and in particular ocean technology careers on account of what we were able to show them.
And what exactly was your involvement in the Scott Carpenter Station?
Dennis came up with the design, and I did the physical engineering of the hull, and I designed the ballasting system because it was made to be to float and be towed to wherever it was going to be deployed, and then flood the ballast tanks and take it down to the bottom, and it would sit there for the duration of the mission. So I designed the ballasting system. I engineered the hull, using, figured out what the what thickness of plate we would need to get the weights right.
Right.
And also I did the system design on the ballast blow system, for when we wanted to bring it back up. And we had other specialists who came in. We had a marine electrician, a very experienced marine electrician, come in, and I worked with him, and together we designed the power system. And we had a retired NASA safety engineer, and I worked with him. We designed the interior ventilation system, and Dennis was involved, heavily with every facet of it, and it came out. It was quite a project. We started, what was it, 1996, I guess. In the late summer of '96, we got everything rolling. By September of 1997, we were ready to put it in the water for its first operational checks.
Very cool.
Then the next year we brought it back. We took the lessons learned. I did a full refit of everything based on the lessons that we learned, and we went down and we took it back the following year in September of 1998 for a second series of missions that was even more successful. In terms of our operations, the habitat operations went so much more smoothly. And Dennis and I learned, even though both of us had read almost every book that was available, encyclopedia or otherwise, dealing with previous habitats that other people like Cousteau and Jan Koblik and people from other countries had done. And even with that knowledge, we learned so much just from the actual doing, that I tell people that you can only learn so much from the books, and then once you get in and start doing it, you're going to learn even more, and you're going to learn some, probably the most important stuff you'll learn as you do it and make mistakes.
So do you think that was one of the most ambitious projects you've been involved with?
Oh yeah, that I've been involved with, yes. Unfortunately, the funding for it dried up, and we weren't able to carry forward. But we had begun the planning for a Carpenter Station Phase 2 design that would have been able to support more people and do more, provide more outreach opportunities, and possibly even get involved, because Dennis has done underwater habitation work, doing actual science,
right,
using the Marine Lab,
mm-hmm.
which existed, which has just recently been retired, and is now a museum at the Marine Resources Development Foundation in Key Largo. So I believe that Dennis, he had wanted to go forward with getting back into, in addition to the outreach missions, get involved in doing more diving science work, but it, as they might say, alas, it was not to be.
Right. How deep was the Scott Carpenter Station?
We kept it at, if I remember correctly, the sill depth of the moon pool was 21 and a half feet.
Okay, so just one atmosphere down then.
Yeah, we wanted to keep it at the no-D level, so because even so that even though saturated, if you had an emergency, you could get someone straight to the surface immediately.
Right.
Our diving protocol normally for a normal exit after I did several 3-day missions, and Dennis did a 6 and I think a 10. Once we reached saturation, when it was time to go, we would swim out and then had kind of like the top of the habitat made a very convenient seating area, 6 or 7 feet higher than the moon pool depth in the water column, and we rested there. It was a mandatory 15 minutes, and I think by the dive tables it was mandated 15 minutes, and we did 25.
Mm-hmm.
Just for always wanting to err on the
Sure.
side of caution.
Yep.
And even doing that, the first time I exited and came out of from doing my first 3-day mission, I was out, and within 15 minutes, I was getting what there's probably another word for it now, but I got what they call skin bends. There's a tingly, prickly feeling in my skin, like I was being repeatedly jabbed with a needle, almost like getting a tattoo.
Huh.
And it was a very tiny amount of outgassing right in the outer layers of the skin. So it's one of those things that everybody reacts to depth and saturation differently.
That's interesting.
When I was at DIT and we were doing they had a big recompression chamber there, and everybody was tested to see what their oxygen tolerance was. And they would take us to 60 feet, and you would breathe through an oral nasal mask, pure oxygen. And they wanted to see if anybody had any reactions to that, because when you're diving mixed gas, as you get really deep, you have to cut back the percentage of oxygen in the mix to always keep your partial pressure of O2 below a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
Because above that level, above that toxicity level, it's not only toxic, it's fatal. Oxygen becomes extremely poisonous to a human at depth. That's why when I see some of these movies where they especially some old ones where they talking about diving, they're down at 200 feet on air.
Uh-huh.
And I've actually been to 200 feet on a surface supplied air, and you get anywhere from feeling like very, very high, like a really good buzz.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some people that were it was like they were completely drunk, wasted.
Huh.
And then you rise 10 feet in the water column, and it's like somebody throws a switch. One guy he was so incapacitated by narcosis, that was nitrogen narcosis, that he couldn't even talk. And so they started pulling him up, and we got about 10 feet up, and he started saying, "Hey, what's going on? What are you doing?"
Yeah, I've read multiple stories about that and heard, but I've never actually talked to anybody that's experienced it. So that's interesting.
The instructors at DIT at the time, the chief diving instructor was a Navy veteran. He was with the Navy teams that set the original suit dive record at 1,700 feet. And there wasn't anything you could ask about saturation diving that he didn't know.
Sure.
So he was able to tell us a lot of things about the original saturation testing that George Bond did with the Man in the Sea program.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a lot about that, and if you ever run across a copy of Bob Barth's book about the Sea Lab program, I highly recommend that you read it, because not only is it just an incredible story, there are some what you call tall tales in there that just make it a hugely enjoyable read.
So Joe, I'm gonna jump in here. I've been
Sure.
kind of letting Brendon take the lead for a while, but just been sitting back and listening. So obviously you've had a lot of work in the past with doing working with Dennis Chamberlain on different projects, and you just have a vast knowledge that you've gained before that. So, what is your opinion on kind of like the project that not only Dennis Chamberlain's pursuing, but what Brendon and I are trying to pursue, just the thought of underwater habitation, like what do you think of that, and like what do you see the future of that as?
I think it's one of the best ideas out there that nobody knows about. You can't. It's the lay public is just so. I guess on account of being undereducated, they just don't appear to have an interest in it. You very rarely see anything these days involving any kind of diving, other than just. I mean, there's a lot of YouTube video of sport diving, which is great. I mean, you can go from being just an average Joe to an underwater explorer just by taking a diving course. But as for living under the, actually living, colonizing, and getting under the water, I think that by not doing it, we're missing out on a huge opportunity to move things forward in terms of not just technology but society as well, because you need specialized technology. The deeper you go, the more specialized and robust it has to be. And also because it's necessarily going to be a confined environment, no matter how big you make it physically, people need to be able to get along. And it's been my experience that people involved with diving and especially underwater technology, it's all about the job. If you know your stuff and can pull your weight, then it's welcome aboard.
It's always cool to be able to talk to like people like you, and on our last episode we had Tech Clark, because scuba and all that is so foreign to me. Like I said before we started recording here, I live in the Midwest, and there's not really scuba spots here, and it's just nothing I've pursued. Brendon has his experience with it as well, so it's always kind of cool to hear from people that have like this vast history in it, and just hearing you guys tell your stories about really adventures that you guys have been on, and the work that's out there for it. It's just all really interesting for me to learn from. So not only is it fun just to be able to work on this project with Brendon, but like I said, I get to meet people like you guys that can share this kind of cool information. So with that kind of transitions to my next question, that Brendon and I you've seen with our social media, we like to pick fun on the space exploration community, but really we've all known they kind of go hand in hand, and that there's been a lot of I guess teamwork in the past. Do you foresee that there's still a viable reason for companies like NASA and SpaceX to keep partnering with underwater research to continue their research?
Oh, absolutely. The Aquarius habitat, as far as I know, is still doing at least some partnering work with the NASA Astronaut Corps, and of course they have the neutral buoyancy facility at Johnson Space Center, where where all the spacewalk training gets done. And the whole space enthusiasts and underwater enthusiasts, we really are of a kind. We're just different leaves on the same tree. And I would love to go to space myself. I'm not sure that the technology that would get me into space as a lay person will come along in time for me to actually do it. Because when I go, I want at least a reasonable assurance that I can come back. There are some people who don't care about that, apparently, but I think that you're just getting out into the ocean, because you're looking at close to 2/3. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about 2/3 of the surface of the Earth.
Right.
Because it's under the water, and there are resources and and things to learn, flora and fauna, species that no one has ever seen, that we don't even know about. There could be, in amongst all that, there could be a cure for cancer or Alzheimer's or something to reverse arterial plaque formation. You just don't know. There's a serendipity effect to exploring in places where no one has ever been.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Well, this is my opinion. I was curious in yours too. But we were talking about, how nobody's talking about it. But in my opinion, part of the reason nobody's talking about it is there isn't, since Jacques Cousteau, there hasn't really been a champion for underwater colonization or scuba or anything like that. Whereas space has got, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whoever, and these larger than life personalities who are talking about it. So everybody's clamoring around it because it's the cool thing right now. I think that's part of the problem, and part of the reason why there isn't more going on underwater.
Oh, you're very correct. I mean, and it's been that way for a long time. Flying in space is a glamorous proposition. It always has been. And the part about underwater technology is that even in the paradise places like the Bahamas or the Maldives or what have you, there's still gritty, hard, dirty work that you do to keep things going. And it's not that there isn't in space travel. I mean, building rockets and spacecraft, and training to fly them. I mean, there's the effort that goes into those. I don't begrudge anybody one whit, but it's just people just don't see it because and you're not having a champion like Cousteau is hugely important. And unfortunately, because Cousteau had started out so well with the Conshelf project, and then I don't know if exactly what happened, but for some reason he wanted to go in a different direction. I think he wanted to go more in the direction of conservation.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And because he more or less backed away from the gains the gains that he had made with Conshelf 1 and 2, and basically said it was not something that was practical. And even the Navy Sea Lab program, which ended so tragically and abruptly, caused the Navy to rethink the reasoning for having actual habitation living on site, and have gone towards the system that they use now, where their divers live and work under pressure, but they live in a pressurized environment on deck, and then get taken down via a personal transfer capsule.
Mm-hmm.
Living on site, it doesn't have a cachet. There's perhaps if it can be done safely enough and with the right, for want of a better word, marketing approach, to get some people into an underwater hotel sort of situation that really does involve being in a pressurized habitat below the surface, not just something where you walk down a flight of stairs from a pier down into a 1 atmosphere habitat,
right?
Which is still very cool. I mean, there's I've seen some hotel and restaurant designs that just look fantastic.
Yep.
But I think if it were possible to build an operating site that was performing some function, even if it was just like, say you found a seamount out in the Gulf Stream, that would be an ideal place to plant a habitat that could monitor the Gulf Stream as it flows over 24/7, as a science outpost. Something like that might catch the imagination and get people interested in it. But that's the problem that we've always had with undersea exploration, is that it's all people see is the sport scuba side of it, where it's just a fun hobby,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't see it as a career or even a generational proposition to explore.
I think one of the things too is that you kind of touched on it with, we know more about the surface of Mars than we do our own oceans, and I don't think a lot of people grasp that because we're on Earth, and we just assume, meanings we have satellite pictures, that we know everything that's here. So I think a lot of people don't realize that there's still so much mystery left in our own world, mainly being the oceans. And like Brendon was saying, we don't have that modern champion other than, people like Dennis Chamberlain and Brendon, I'm putting you on a pedestal, but, people like you that are, really pushing for this kind of this movement. And quite frankly, I think we're lacking the sex appeal. I feel like if we were better looking men, we might be able to gain more attention.
One can never tell. But there are a handful of people out there, though, that give me hope. People like Phil Newton,
Yeah.
Graham Hawkes,
Right.
that have been able to, to get because Dennis, I think Dennis will agree with me on this, is that as much as we want to move forward for its own sake and learn and explore, the key reason that it's going so slowly is money.
Yep.
And it may, maybe we just haven't found our Elon Musk yet,
Mm-hmm.
where he took Tesla and turned that around and created SpaceX, and you see where we're at now.
Yep.
So if somebody came along that in some fortuitous happenstance, Phil Newton as an example, I mean he's done very well for himself with his company and marketing the gym and the Wasp suits, and doing deep dive operations, human deep dive operations, but it isn't at the kind of level financially
Mm-mm.
that you could make the leap to a habitat.
And I'm sure you've heard Phil talk about his idea for underwater habitats and stuff like that. So it's in his ballpark, but like with him and Graham, and Dennis even mentioned this when I first started talking to him, is it's an older generation that, they may have the knowledge and stuff like that, but I don't want to put words in people's mouths and stuff like that, but they're later on in their life, so they don't have that I'm not even sure what the proper word I'm looking for to say here, but that zest, I guess, that is appealing to the general public. They're not household names, for one thing, obviously. So there's for all their pros, those big cons, I think, are the big stumbling blocks for those people.
And I saw a video, I can't recall for the life of me where it was, but it was recently, and I think it was Phil Newton was talking about putting an installation, a habitat installation, near a thermal vent.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I know exactly which one you're talking about.
And using that energy to drive Stirling engines, which would easily be able to generate as much as electrical power as you could ever need, and it would all come from just the temperature differential from a from a black smoker or some other kind of thermal vent. Could provide all the power you could ever want.
Yeah, I think it was from a TED talk or something like that, but it was a few years ago. Yep, I think so. Yeah.
And when I heard him say that, just something clicked in my head. That's awesome. I never would have thought of that.
Uh-huh. I want to segue, as much as I'd like to stay on the underwater habitat things, that's our bread and butter. I do want to talk about, your when we were talking beforehand, one of the things you mentioned was that your experience has been in areas of tech needed for life underwater. And so I want to talk a little bit about underwater tech and what kind of things, when you talk underwater tech, what's some of the first things you think of, and what are some of the things that you really intrigue you, or you're very interested in?
Well, there's several avenues there. Primarily, the first one and the most critical, of course, is power. You can't do anything without electricity.
Mm-hmm.
When a reliable and relatively inexpensive power source becomes available, you're going to see a lot of other difficulties go away. And then once you've established inexpensive, reliable power, then the next most important thing is atmosphere control. Maintaining the proper balance of gases by scrubbing out excess CO2 and providing fresh oxygen. And there are ways to do that. I've seen some interesting ideas that could do with the funding to pursue real R&D as to whether they would work or not, to create what you would, I guess you could think of it as a regenerative scrubber that can remove CO2 from your habitat atmosphere and dump it to the ocean, and at the same time extract oxygen from the ocean to use in the habitat. So that would be the second area of technology that definitely needs much more work. And then the third would probably be habitability, the technology of making things not necessarily luxurious, but comfortable. Most of the habitats that I'm aware of, even with the exception of the Jules Undersea Lodge, have been somewhat Spartan.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a technology that doesn't get talked about much, but it needs to be explored as well if you're going to, in order to be able to have people interested for long-term habitation.
And for me, that's always been, when I started designing, it was always, I started from that end and figured the other stuff would catch up. But if it wasn't appealing to the eye, nobody, the layperson is not going to want to go visit it if it's a old metal, compact, claustrophobic tube or box or something.
Absolutely. Dennis and I have had many conversations about that. And we both, Dennis and I are both endlessly fascinated by the concept drawings for done by artists like Ralph McQuarrie, or who was the other one? They did some of the original concept drawings for Star Wars and the Star Trek motion pictures, where even if what gets built looks completely different, just looking at some of those drawings, because they're so artistically fleshed out,
mm-hmm.
it's like, would it be the coolest thing
mm-hmm.
to live in that?
Yep. And that's the whole thing is the pique somebody's interest in, like you said, even if it doesn't end up looking like that, as long as you get people talking and get them interested, you've done something.
Right.
So yep, I agree 100%.
Yeah, the building, the physical construction of habitats on the seafloor, you can make some fantastic designs. There's an ocean architect by the name of Jacques Rougerie that I had the good fortune to meet when we were doing the Carpenter Station project, and he has come up with some undersea habitat ideas, and also ideas that fit more within the idea of what now seems to be called seasteading,
mm-hmm.
where you build a semi-submersible structure that floats, and so you have chambers of it down below the water line that you go down and you can look out, but you also have elements that are that you can climb up above, just like you would on a boat. And there's an endless amount of creativity out there that it needs to be coordinated and focused, I suppose.
Yeah, and talking about Jacques, we had talked about him earlier on one of the things, and he's actually speaking at some big conference right now, actually, about a lot of this as we speak. I think I saw it on his Instagram or something along those lines. And yeah, he's got some very interesting designs and ideas and he's actually built a couple of smaller ones already.
Oh yes, he's a very nice guy, super smart.
Very cool.
You guys kind of covered a lot of the different subjects here, and I guess that's part of the reason I haven't jumped in. I've just been kind of sitting back and listening and learning with this, which is, like I said, it's just really cool for me to kind of learn about something that I haven't been exposed to much. So it's been really cool. Brendon, is there anything else you wanted to dive in with him, or do you think he covered all your questions?
No, I mean, obviously we could. I kind of rushed a little bit along, but we could have had this go on for 2 hours with the amount of information and knowledge that you've got there, Joesph. But we want to try to be mindful of your time and our listeners' time and everything, and try to keep it within the hour time frame as much as possible.
Oh yes.
But no, I appreciate you being on. Nothing else. I just appreciate you being here and giving us your time. And yeah.
Yeah, I could sit and talk about this stuff, for a long time, especially if it was in a pub over a pint.
Yeah, well, we have to take you up on that sometime.
Yeah. So, how can people keep up with you? You got Twitter, the Facebook. What kind of projects do you want people to follow?
Well, other than this one, yours at Atlantis Sea Colony, and Dennis has his also, the Atlantica project. Follow and interact with both of those. I don't have any other than Facebook. I don't have a social media presence of my own, myself. I've never messed about with Twitter or Instagram or any of those things. In its earlier days, I heard someone, I can't remember the pundit's name, but he referred to Twitter as an intellectual latrine. And that kind of gave me a bad taste for it.
Yeah, that's not far off.
No, that's probably accurate. Yeah.
No, it's been great talking to you guys, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. We'll definitely bring you back on in the near future. I know you got, like you just said, you're going to be helping out Dennis Chamberlain, and we're hoping to get him on once his life isn't so busy, which you never know, could always stay that way. But as far as Colonize the Ocean podcast goes, everybody, you can find us at www.colonizetheoceanpod. Sorry, I'm going to redo that. You can find us at www.colonizetheocean.com or atlantaseacolony.com, or you can find us on any of the social medias: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all at Atlantis Sea Colony. So thank you guys again for joining us, and thank you, Joesph Bishop, for joining us, and we'll hope to see all of you and hear from you all soon.
Y'all take care.
Thank you.